Yo, good evening everybody. It's Curtis back with another investment video. Today I wanted to do a video on the power of compounding interest. In a few previous videos that I've produced, I mentioned the power of compounding interest, namely the top 5 reasons to invest while you're young, and also what type of investor are you, whether you're growth, value, or a dividend stroke income investor. And basically the same sentiment came across in those videos, that the power of compounding interest is extremely strong, and those with a long-term investing view will really benefit from compounding interest. Now, I managed to find a really good compounding interest calculator. There are loads online, but what I wanted to do is just to really kind of show you visually what that could look like. I'm quite a visual person, generally speaking, so it's really sort of helped bring that message home to me, and so hopefully there's some of you out there whereby this will sort of help and benefit you. But before we get into all of that, if you don't know what to do because you're new, please make that like button go blue. Please hit the like button on this video. Infinite Investors is about helping all new and non-investors make sense of the crazy worlds of the stock market, whether that's through my own personal investment journey, other investment related topics, stock market news. I'm trying to be a one-stop shop to sort of give you that insight so you can make better investing decisions. So if you want to be on board with that journey, please hit that subscribe button right now and help me get to my next goal of 500 subscribers. But yeah, let's talk about the power of compounding interest. Before I go into actually working out a few scenarios, I'm going to leave this link of this article in the description, but it's a really well condensed article that just shows the average stock market returns for the S&P 500 and the stock market in general over different time periods. So I'll leave the link in this description. But what it mentions is that the S&P 500 provides an average return of 10%. Now, I did mention this in a previous video. This is over the last 90 years. So it is pretty skewed from the fact that, you know, at the turn of the 20th century, there were higher returns than there were, for example, at the turn of the 21st century. But it just kind of wants to give you a picture that, you know, the S&P 500 is an average return of sort of 10%, whereas the stock market's average return is 7%. Now, when you look at the stock market's return of 7%, it does take into consideration that there were highs such as in the 1950s of 16%, but also there were, you know, negative 3% returns, as I mentioned, in the 2000. You know, what's quite important for me is looking at the last 10 years. So the last 10 years, the average stock market return was 6.88%, and the S&P tends to track higher, which I'll show you that previously. But, you know, just shy of 7% is the stock market return over the last 10 years. The average return over the last 50 years was 10.909%, which obviously takes into consideration some of those boom years. The average investor return on funds, so the S&P 500 over the last 30 years gave an average return of 6.73%, whereas the average investor underperformed the market at just 3.66%. So if you're an active investor doing your own portfolio, this was the average rate. If you just put into the S&P 500, this was the return that you're looking at. So again, just shy of 7%. The average rate of return over the next 10 years, that's forecasted by Vanguard. Vanguard has a product, VOO, and that's the ticker symbol. It's an ETF tracking the S&P 500. They've got loads of bonds and other ETFs as well. They forecast that the average return over the next 10 years will be 6.6%. So again, 6.5%, just shy of 7%, and about 3.1% on bonds. The average return on the S&P 500 or mutual funds tracking the S&P 500, so the type of thing you will expect in an ETF or another fund, was 7 to 9%. So again, you know, around the 7% mark, but around potentially 8% if you're tracking the S&P 500 as opposed to tracking the market in general. The average dividend yield for the S&P 500 has been about 2%. Again, this is obviously on an annual basis, so you know, when you look at these returns, it's not taking into account dividends, so that needs to then further be added onto it, and it's got a whole bunch of other information. So I wanted to sort of make a few assumptions around the 7%, 8% mark, because, you know, talking about the next 10 years, talking about the average rate of return for the stock market and as a whole for the S&P, that felt like the right mark to sort of do my scenarios. So I'm using monevator.com, and I'm using their calculator. Again, I'll leave the link in the description. But let's say, for example, I put a lump sum of just 250 quid. So I'll start off with £250, but I believe with a lot of discipline that I could potentially save £500 on a monthly basis for my specific retirement fund. So if I did £6,000 annually, and I looked at over 35 years, and I looked at, you know, an interest rate of 8%, which I'm taking that from the fact that the average S&P was 7 to 9% in a mutual fund. So in an ETF, I'd expect maybe around 8% average over that long period of time. If I calculate that, that is a 1.12 million value. And, you know, this is where it sort of really gets interesting. It shows that, you know, I would have actually saved 200k of my own money, but based off the compounding rate of interest, this green curve here, you know, that £200,000 is effectively 5x'd and turned into, you know, £1.2 million. So that for me really demonstrates the power of compounding interest. What's really also insightful to me, and might be insightful to you, is that I'm the type of person that I won't really like to put a large amount up front. I'd rather save that money in cash and buy more during times where there's a dip. So rather than sort of upfront just put, say, 10k, I would rather just put, say, 1k or £500, and then have that money aside. So if there are dips, I can sort of take advantage of that. I mentioned in the 7 tips for beginner investors to always try and have a bit of an emergency cash fund to take advantage of certain scenarios, etc., just so that you can feel comfortable if there are opportunities that present themselves. But if you, for example, were a bit top heavy and you then sort of said 10,000, that 1.12 million just goes to 1.2.5 million. So it doesn't really, for me, over a 35-year period, have that much of a material impact. I'd rather save that 9,000 and keep that in cash, and effectively you know, add that over time should I want to. So for me, you know, adding a really big lump sum at the beginning, personally, to me, is not that advantageous. It might be to you in different scenarios, but that's just one thing I sort of learned, that actually I'd rather spread that money over, you know, the years, as opposed to try and sort of be a bit too top heavy up front. Now, obviously, 35 years is a long period. You might be thinking, actually, I'm not really trying to think about retirement investing right now. I want to see what I can do in a sort of next, you know, 10-year period. So if I keep the same assumptions and just literally reduce this down to sort of 10 years, it shows that you'll have a return of £96,000. Now, what you should bear in mind is that if you save that money, it'll be £60,000, but with the compounding interest, it turns into £96,000. So that's an additional £36,000. That's a 60% additional return, and over the 10-year period. So again, the power of compounding interest is extremely high. So I'll leave the link in this calculator in the description. Have a play around with it, you know, work out your own budgets based off, you know, the revenue, you know, income that you have, and sort of play around with it. But, you know, as I mentioned in a previous video about everything you need to know about ETFs, I'm going to start investing into some ETFs. You know, unfortunately, I need to start thinking about my retirement. I should have thought about retirement many years ago, but I didn't. And so, you know, for me, it's a little bit of a catch up, but also it's quite interesting to see actually the power of compounding interest over a long period of time, and how it can really pay off. I will be investing this money in my ISA with free trade. So, you know, the benefits there is that, you know, I will remain under the ISA allowance if I was to add 6,000, because the allowance is 20,000 a year. I think I'll probably do around 12,000 with my normal active stocks that I actively manage. So that will give me about an £8,000 buffer. to use for retirement purposes, etc. So I still won't hit that, which then means all of this won't be subject to any capital gains tax or any dividend tax if I maintain this rate over the long term. So all of this money that you'll see, if I go back to a 35-year period, providing the government don't get rid of ISAs or any unforeseen, who knows what the economy or what the future is going to look like in this period of time. But all things considered, if everything stays the same, then this all here, it will be tax-free money as well. This difference between 200,000 and just shy of 1.2 million, that extra million will be a tax-free amount that I would have compounded. So obviously there are going to be down cycles. I'm never going to be that idealistic to say that I'll get an average of 8% every year. This is an average, and I think over the long term it will do it. There might be years where it will be higher. There will definitely be years where it will be lower. It's predicted that there will be a recession in the next couple of years. Who knows? If that's the case, there might be a recession every sort of 10 years. So there might be 3 recessions during the next 35-year period. But in the long term, I see, obviously, if that happens, I won't be selling. I'll be trying to sort of buy more during those down cycles. But over the long term, if that was the rate I'm looking at, then it could be quite favorable. If I drop the rate to say 6%, you can see it does change quite a bit. That extra 2%, is basically 500k. So it is quite significant. If I get it to sort of 7%, which a lot of the figures, it's just shy. It's about 900k, which I still think is a reasonable, not reasonable. I think it's an exceptional return, personally speaking. But yeah, I'll leave the link in the description for both this and for this article. Have a play around with your budget and see the power of compounding interest for yourself. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please like, please comment, please subscribe. I've got a lot of videos coming up, and help me get to 500 subscribers by the end of the month. Wish you all the best of your portfolios, and last but not least, happy investing. Take care, guys.